Welcome to the xBN Editors Lounge podcast. My name is Isabella. I'm the editor of xBN Executive Business News, and I will be your host on today's show. Today's guest is AdeMcCormack, founder of the Intelligent Leadership Hub. Ade is an advisor and educator with a focus on leadership development and executive education. He works in 40 countries around the world and across sectors. The overarching theme of today's conversation was the question, has disruption come to save us? Please welcome AdeMcCormack. So welcome, Ade. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you for inviting me, Isabella.
Let's jump right in. In the middle of an energy crisis with like 2.5 years of a pandemic right behind us, with a war in Europe and counting, is now the right time to think about disrupting your own business?
Well, I think to some extent, the environment will do the disrupting for you. I guess the question really is, how do you respond to an increasingly disrupted environment? So if you think of organizations as living organisms, they have to adapt in order to survive. The world is becoming more disrupted, and therefore we need to adapt on a more regular basis. And so I guess, is it a case of making dainty little changes on a very regular basis, or going for wholesale transformation? Well, I don't actually recommend transforming, because often transforming can disrupt your cash flows, can upset your staff, and essentially you damage what was already working. However, the big risk is in only having one business model. It's like having only one, betting on one horse in the race, so to speak. So I advocate, rather than transforming, creating parallel business models. So you're running a portfolio of business models in effect. So one day when the digital Grim Reaper comes into the Plan A reception, your main business, so to speak, you have other sources of cash. So I guess that's quite radical in terms of what's required from the leadership, so to speak, but fundamentally it doesn't require transforming your existing organization. By all means, automate it, sprinkle it with tech pixie dust, make it faster, smarter, cheaper. But what we have to be careful of is that even a faster, smarter, cheaper Titanic is still a Titanic. And even one optimized to detect icebergs is no match for air travel.
That sounds in a way also like a bit of a relief for management and leadership, because I think the greatest fear might be to disrupt what works and to think that you have to reshape what is already there. And now you suggest you just need like a second operating system and a third one and the fourth one maybe to build in addition. So probably might this explain why like digital transformation and adding on new business streams of business would also not just like harm the workforce, but increase the number of staff you'd need?
It would. I guess digital transformation, if you went to a digital transformation cocktail party, no two people would be doing the same thing. Some see this as a kind of, the glass part of your business, the user experience. Others see it as a profound structural change. When I think of digital transformation, I think less about being more digital and more preparing for the digital age, the post-industrial age. And to do that, technology is very important, but also how you utilize your people. But because the majority of people today are employed as process workers, as cogs in the machine, if you were to put them all through some sort of design thinking course, trying to make them Leonardo da Vinci, you would simply confuse them and therefore damage your primary source of cash. But to your point, what I'm advocating certainly requires more people, but it requires a very different type of person to staff the the plan B, C, D, E, etc.
All right, that sounds like my next question that I had prepared, and it's like going there because many innovative leaders they've either been stopped dead in their tracks or they have stopped dead in their tracks by activist boards or activist staff alike, trying to stop processes of new business models and development of new ideas and innovative new products and business lines. So how do you go about convincing everyone? Because, I mean, if we remember, like General Electric was maybe a classic case, and now General Electric appliances been sold to Haier, and now with a new way of approaching staff and working with staff, they like overly successful now, especially with a digital product.
Yeah, I mean, GE is a good example because it got carried away and said, we're a software business. And they took their eye off plan A and focused too much on plan B, C, D, E, etc. So, whilst it's exciting to transform your organization, you mustn't take your eye off your primary sources of cash. And I guess with the GE appliances going to Haier, the Haier model is a kind of exemplary casebook example of distributed leadership, micro enterprises, everyone judged on the customer experience, not just the sales guy, so to speak. It's a wonderful model. Everyone is accountable. If you're not in some way or other improving the customer experience, what are you doing in the organization?
Mm-hmm. So basically, that's also the line you would say to convince boards and staff to go about customer experience first, because they would be able to reimagine that easily.
Well, yes, and sorry, I didn't really answer the question originally.
I'm behind you. Behind the idea.
Yes. I mean, the reality is that if your staff, your shareholders, and the market are telling you something, you would be foolish not to factor that in. I can get very angry with a tsunami, but the tsunami doesn't care. I am better to recognize a tsunami is coming. It's out of my control. I can either drown or I can attempt to surf it, so to speak. So when you're getting a lot of energy criticizing your leadership style or your approach, and that includes perhaps the unions as well, you do have to think very, very carefully about whether you are fighting the tide, so to speak. But in some cases, you may not be. Some cases, you might be very, very forward thinking, and you realize that the world is becoming increasingly disrupted, and you actually have to threaten your own cash flows for a longer term survival. That's a very difficult sell. But, the way public quoted companies show success is based on a very traditional, P&L, balance sheet, etc. Actually, those structures are the things that are going to really constrain us from radically transforming. Because when we look at a lot of the value of modern organizations, there is no row in the spreadsheet for them. They're just bundled under intangibles. So, for example, data capital, brand capital, cognitive capital. These things are not explicitly stated, even though they make up the bulk of the value of the organization. So I guess what I'm saying is that, yes, we can train up our CEOs to make a more robust argument to the activist shareholders, but fundamentally, the CEO and the board are constrained by how success is measured ultimately by the accounting standards that they have to adhere to.
So is this a way to go into the direction to first morph your organization into a new way of measuring success?
Yes, I think you're right. But what you're doing it in spite of the system, not because of the system. So only the most forward-thinking of leaders would, if you like, put serious effort behind sustainability initiatives when in fact they're just being judged by profit. The shareholders want 30% year on year, whatever it is, you have to deliver it. We don't care how you deliver it. If that's the specification, then why would you care about long-term or even short-term issues like sustainability? So it requires a kind of very enlightened leader to say, okay, I'll give them the numbers they want because I need to stay employed myself, but I will also run my own dashboard, so to speak. And I will also show that if we start to build our organization less around the needs of the shareholders and more around the values that our customers, our suppliers, our employees, sort of admire, that brings benefits as well. And basically you're making an economic case for ESG.
All right. And I was just, while you were speaking, I was just trying to find a classic case that would illustrate that, like a well-known brand or well-known corporation that went this way, along this way, in a fashion that you would say, that's basically how you can approach this type of new line in business.
Well, I suppose
What come to mind?
Patagonia, sort of clothing company that are working within the constraints of financial, the financial measures, but they recognize, for example, the importance of people, so that whenever there's a good wave, they're all allowed to go out surfing if they happen to be near the sea, so to speak. So they're taking a very kind of enlightened approach within the constraints of how they have to report to the market, so to speak. Of course, you've got social enterprises that themselves are, they are looking at impact and not just sort of the outcomes of profit and, balance sheets growth. So social organizations, social enterprises, non-governmental organizations, etc. There's a whole bunch of organizations that are not driven by profit, but there's a whole bunch of organizations that are taking a slightly more enlightened approach, but they are still grounded in the hard realities that they have to get their metal from blood mine, etc.
Would this be like someone, like a leader like Richard Branson, for instance, with Virgin, where people like post online on his social media, I want to work for you. And also these companies are also attracting a lot of talent. They do not battle as much as others who do not follow along such an enlightened path of vision and values. As
I mean, there's the Richard Bransons, the Mark Benioffs, who seem very enlightened, who treat their organizations like a family, pretty people-centric, and so on. And these are kind of talisman type leaders. And I think they're a tremendous, I say they're a tremendous risk. I mean, Steve Jobs, Apple's done pretty well post Steve Jobs. But in any case, the cult of the hero leader, I believe, is a mistake, because essentially you centralize all the value into one individual, which is a tremendous waste of the cognition of all the other people in the organization. And what this results in is, for example, the CEO of McDonald's getting paid over 1,000 times more than the median salary of all the other workers. Now, it turns out that he probably deserves that because everyone else is a process worker and he's the only one making the tough decisions. So I'm strongly advocating a more decentralized leadership approach. And in fact, I go as far as to say ubiquitous leadership. So anybody who has responsibility for anything or anyone, no matter how far down the structure, they are the leader in their particular context. So I'm not in favor of the charismatic leader as hero model, which essentially has come out of Hollywood and we're emulating. And on top of that, we've built an ecosystem around that hero And that involves the executive search industry, that involves the executive education industry. And they've kind of created closed systems where a handful of people can make all the money, so to speak, which of course leads to economic inequality and ultimately social disparity. And that's a problem for society.
So you'd say the new visionary leader would be rather someone who empowers others and is not the classic iconic type that we know now, but it's more the upcoming new type of leader, like also in hire. It's like very iconic leader in a way, but he doesn't get into the way of his people.
I mean, I think hire is an interesting one because it has been embraced by Harvard Business Review, etc. So it's the easy example of enlightened leadership. But fundamentally, leadership, in my view, is not a role, it's a competence. And it's a competence we all need to learn.
Very nice. Very nice. So basically, the type of leader that we need has changed, and it's less about the leader, but more about the people and the ideas. So, okay.
Most of us are happy to live our lives in a learned helplessness state. If my boss tells me what to do, I don't have to take responsibility for it. Whereas if I'm a leader, whereas if I'm actually responsible for this customer, this supplier, this new intern, for example, then I will internalize the responsibility and I will actually lead. But I need to also be empowered to make decisions to put right any or capitalize on any opportunities that emerge in my given part of the world. Well, the leadership model we have today is essentially, imagine a football match where the two captains chase the ball around the pitch throughout the match, issuing instructions to each of their players as to what they should do. That's ridiculous, but that's what we have. And this is in a game where there's only one ball and the rules are very clear. So our leadership, our centralized leadership model is very broken.
This is really enlightening. Thank you very much. Grand idea. It also chimes in, I think, with Peter Drucker, who was also extremely wary of charismatic leaders. And he also spoke about President Truman, that he didn't have an ounce of charisma, as you say, like original tone. But still, he called him a great leader because he could be trusted. And if people heard him say yes, they knew it was yes, and the other way around. And I think is this the values that you point to, like trustworthiness and consistency, more that direction?
Essentially, we are wired to be tribal. And we were all tribal up until around 12,000 years ago. Human adaptations take around 25,000 years. So we are naturally tribal. And key to remaining in the tribe is establishing trust. People can trust you to do what you say, trust you to be a net contributor to the resources as opposed to a net depleter of the resources. So we are social animals, and socializing at scale is our superpower. And trust is a fundamental ingredient of that. Trust, of course, is context sensitive. There's no such thing as you trust someone for a specific set of circumstances. You trust them to deliver on their promises in terms of a business relationship, perhaps, but you don't trust them to come up necessarily with a very good joke at a wedding, for example. So that trust is contextual. And perhaps most importantly, values are contextual. We think values are absolute. We have our own personal values. We often see the world through those values. Those values vary across the country and across the planet, and they vary across time as well.
Yeah, very true. Now, if we take a slight turn to the future itself, if we're now preparing for the future that we maybe like to co-create. What is this future going to be like? Like, what type of paradigm would you expect to be coming up, or are we in the middle of it and not seeing it really well? And what can we still shape, and what do we have to let go in terms of trade-offs? Because it's not just like adding on something new, but maybe also like letting go of something old.
Yes. I think if we look at the context of the last 300 years, we have tamed nature. Dog.
No worries, we love dogs here.
Well, if we look at the context of the last 300 years, we have tamed nature. We have created a synthetic certainty in society. So much so that we have become arrogant enough to say that we will design the future, so to speak. You might say disruption has come down from Mount Olympus to correct us humans, to stop us from being arrogant, and is now saying, essentially, you are no longer in control of your destiny, so to speak. Therefore, we are no longer the architects of our future. The future is unknowable. So the best we can do is respond to our environment going forward. And this is fundamentally epigenetics. The animals, the living beings that survive are those that adapt best to the environment they're actually faced with. So amoebas do not have 2030, 2040, 2050 visions. They simply respond to their environment. That's what we were doing up until around 12,000 years ago. Then all of a sudden we decided to put structures in place, like management structures, ownership of property, etc., subjugating our fellow man, etc., etc. So you might say the rot started 12,000 years ago with the agricultural revolution, and it accelerated very much with the industrial revolution. Essentially, disruption, and I'm not saying disruption is a god or a goddess or anything like that. It's the compounding and conflating of macro environmental forces from political, economic, social, technological, the war for natural resources, the war for talent, the space race. All of these things are compounding and conflating to make the world unknowable. We're not going to like that because we've been so used to controlling our own destiny. So you might say we're currently on a dystopian path in many respects, thanks to the Industrial Revolution, but we are now transitioning from the era of security, and of course I'm talking about the first world here primarily. We're being forced to move from security to freedom. So goodbye comfort, goodbye convenience, hello danger, hello precariousness, hello liberation, hello feeling human again. This is good news, but it's not for everybody. It's only for those who want to be human again.
This is a very strong message. That's true. So we have to learn to embrace danger, because currently, almost internationally, we see the opposite, like anxiety on the rise, basically.
Yes, we have, like, the dog is a good example. The dog will sit there doing nothing, and then we'll hear someone at the door and we'll go mental. So the dog has no anxiety, no anxiety, no anxiety, acute anxiety, no anxiety, no anxiety, no anxiety. We have developed chronic anxiety, chronic anxiety, chronic anxiety, and we very rarely get acute anxiety. However, we are never really in a rested state. And that's unhealthy, of course, and that leads to, I'm not qualified to say this, but, sort of heart disease and so on. So I personally advocate having at least one near-death experience every day.
Okay, how would you go about having this one?
Well, essentially, about, 6 or so years ago, I started doing parkour. Now, I'm not going to give the impression that I jump across very high buildings or anything like that, but I do stuff that scares me. And when you're scared, you're not thinking about, what am I going to be eating tonight? Or when I'm going to get that report in? You're thinking about getting through this without breaking something. And I find that really, it's a kind of very, very dynamic mindfulness, so to speak. And of course, I'm stretching I'm exaggerating a little bit, but that's the reality of it. So I advocate people spend less time the more time you spend in a state of chronic anxiety, the less cognition you have available to doing innovative.
It narrows.
Yes. So your productivity as a post-industrial unit of economic value is proportional or inversely proportional to the amount of chronic anxiety you carry with you.
This is a very good exercise. I think we will recommend this, and I will definitely be following along.
What we've got to be careful of is if we become dopamine junkies, we will be constantly looking for higher and higher highs, but there's always the consequence of the associated low. So the ultimate trick in life is to get some sort of joy out of smelling a rose or watching a young child play, or the more we can get joy out of the mundane, the happier we will be. So that's why I'm sort of guarding again, even though I do the parkour, I try to self-regulate and
balance it with other activities.
Yeah, well, but try to sort of, literally the conversation we're having now, this is perfect because there is only now. This is as good as it can be at this point in time.
That's true.
You want to get the best from it.
From every moment. Yeah, that's very true.
In the most mundane of things.
Yeah.
Often.
So I appreciate this very much, but I have one more question for you because I asked around, said I would be speaking to you, and if there were questions that I should ask. And one repeated question came up. The others we have tackled. And one question, my last one now, is how to go about the rising complexity. I mean, of course, not by trying to deal with it all alone, of course, but are there other pieces of advice that you would have?
Yes, I've already alluded to the need to have multiple business models. So you're instead of just backing one horse in the race, you're backing multiple horses in the race. And the other thing is to ensure that your failure velocity is sufficiently high, because it's through failure that you're able to, it's through failure. Failure is a consequence of experimentation, and experimentation is the price you pay for innovation. So if your failure velocity is too low, you're not innovating at a fast enough rate. And complexity at any given moment in time is just an environment trapped in time. So you say, how do I best respond to this environment? But how do I respond to the environment, in the following second or the following day or the following week? And you do that by continuously testing the market. Fundamentally, in my view, organizations need to be like living organisms or like tribes. So they sense the market. They're on the lookout all the time. The faint snap of the twig or the ground.
Speak to people all the time. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So we need to be emotionally intelligent, organizationally as well as individually. We have to sense what other people are thinking and feeling. We have to sense what's going on in the wider world. That gives rise to, let's say, a gut feeling or a heart feeling or a mind feeling, organizationally or individually. And we need to use that data to decide what to do next. And most importantly, we need to act promptly. So this is emotional intelligence, intellectual intelligence, physical intelligence. Organizations today, because of synthetic certainty, are too focused on IQ and not focused enough on EQ and PQ.
So if you get together with your team, you would collect the data from the from the emotional intelligence, and it will be much faster, giving you a very precise picture, actually, of complex interactions and circumstances, much faster than any raw data from any kind of means would give you.
IoT, for example, has a very strong role to play here. It gives you sensors in the environment. A more mundane example is that in many organizations, the sales staff in the field it's not easy for them to communicate with marketing. It's not easy for them to communicate with product development. And therefore, what the sales guys are seeing slight changes in the market are not reflected in the marketing and the product development. That's a mundane example of not sensing what's happening in your environment. And if you're not sensing, you're becoming decoupled from reality. And as you become decoupled from reality, it's basically you're a dead man walking.
All right. So we need to really crank up the sensing in terms of people sensing, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. The people have a very strong role to play in this, but the key thing is sensing your environment. And as the environment gets more complex, and I'll give you an example. There's a lot of talk about agility at the moment. And agility is like what happens when you get into a fight with a bear. How can you duck and weave and escape from the bear? So the next level up is anticipation. So you look out for a bear. You're constantly scanning the horizon for bears. And as you're scanning for bears, you get bitten by a snake. And you think, well, hang on, I wasn't looking for snakes. Well, that's because you were too focused on one thing. So this is the difference between focus and attention. Focus, you are drilling into something. Attention is just having a soft awareness of what's going on around you. It's like driving a car. When you're driving a car, you're very much concentrating on the erratic motorcyclists in front of you, but at the same time, you are aware of what's going on around you. So we need to make that balance between focus and attention. And of course, the speed at which we flick between both of those increases as the world becomes more complex.
Thank you very much. Extremely inspiring conversation, could continue for hours. And now we're going to process what you said and make an article from it also, but we will also deliver our conversation as a podcast and as a video. So thank you very much. I hope we'll talk soon again.
Thank you, Isabella.
Thank you. Have a great day.